In mid-July 2025, the Bittensor network launched Uniswap Liquidity. In this video, we're going to walk through what Uniswap V3 liquidity is, how it works, and how you can invest your Tau and Alpha in a Uniswap V3 liquidity pool. If you've watched our videos before, you've seen diagrams like this, where there's Tau and there's Alpha, and the yellow box represents a liquidity pool. And in the liquidity pool, that's how you turn your Tau to buy Alpha or take your Alpha to sell it back into Tau. And as an example, if you have 10 Tau and you want to buy Alpha, you put in a buy order with that 10 Tau. It goes into the liquidity pool. And if the price is 0.1, you might assume you'd get 100 Alpha, but because there's slippage and other things, you get 97 Alpha through the liquidity pool. If you have questions about slippage and what that means, I'll post a link to a video in the comments below. So Uniswap V3 is a new type of liquidity pool. All subnets are Uniswap V2, the way we just described it, unless the subnet owner turns on Uniswap V3. And then it still is going to behave much in the same way for the average user. But there's some differences under the hood that we're going to go through that you have to understand in order to invest in these pools if you choose to do so. On the subnet page, there's a new column showing which subnets have Uniswap V3 turned on. In Uniswap V3, instead of it just being a large average of Alpha and Tau to get the price, there are ticks. And each one of the ticks is a range of price. Each tick is 0.01% of a price. If you add Tau, the price goes up. If you add Alpha into a tick, you're taking Alpha turning into a Tau, that's a sell, that lowers the price. Here's a very simple Uniswap V3 liquidity pool where there's only liquidity at a few positions. When it's below that current price, there's only Tau. When you're above the current price, there is only Alpha. So let's do an example. Here at this point, there's 9.7 Alpha in the liquidity pool. If I buy 0.5 Tau worth of Alpha, 4.7 Alpha comes out. And now at this tick, there's 4.7 Alpha and 0.5 Tau. The price doesn't change because we still have liquidity in this tiny little tick. But what happens if I put in 1 Tau? If I put in 1 Tau, now this little tick only has Tau for liquidity. There's no more Alpha because all of the Alpha has now been distributed from that purchase. What that does is we added Tau and we go to the next place where there's Alpha liquidity. So we jumped the price up to this tick way up here. And for example, that could be a large jump of, 0.3. Now let's take this to a subnet liquidity pool. Inside a subnet liquidity pool, the chain is providing a whole bunch of liquidity already. So there's Alpha and there's Tau at every single tick. So we won't see a huge jump like I showed in that last example. That was mostly just for dramatic effect. And in a case like this, any buys or sells will look exactly like a Uniswap V2 purchase. It just happens over tiny little ticks that the average user won't even ever see. But the new feature in Uniswap V3 is you can add liquidity. And so you set a position with a minimum and a maximum. And here I'm showing it in this box. And when you set that range, you then supply Tau and you supply Alpha into that liquidity pool. So you can see the bars have raised up. There's a little bit more Tau down here, and there's a little bit more Alpha up here. And so that means whenever there's a purchase, your Tau or your Alpha gets turned into Tau. And as the price continues to go up, your Alpha gets turned into Tau. If people start selling Alpha back to Tau, that will turn back, and all of that Tau turns back into Alpha. Why would you want to set a liquidity position in Uniswap V3? Well, whenever someone makes a stake in Bittensor, they pay a staking fee. That fee is distributed to everyone who had Tau or Alpha involved in the transaction. So if some of your Alpha was sold to become Tau, or some of your Tau was sold to become Alpha, you make a percentage of that staking fee. So what are some of the strategies you can do to maximize the amount of staking fees that you get? One approach is to go with a very narrow range. And then what ends up happening is you can see the bars got bigger. You have more of the liquidity at each one of those ticks. Now, the disadvantage to this is, of course, if the price goes out of this range, you stop earning any of the percentage of the stake. Another option is to go with much smaller amounts over a wider range. This accounts for larger price fluctuations. Clearly, you don't get as much of a percentage, but you're going to be in range for a longer period of time should the price change by a whole lot. What happens when you go out of the range? So in this case, people keep putting Tau in and the price has gone up. What happened is the alpha that you owned over here has been sold, and now the price of alpha is higher. So if you had held that alpha traditional staking, it would have been worth more than having it in the liquidity pool. The other thing that can happen is all of your Tau gets turned into alpha and the price is down here. Well, unfortunately now all of that alpha is worth less because the price has gone down. So it's very important to monitor and maintain your positions to ensure that you're not losing too much value while the price is fluctuating. So this is just an overview of how Uniswap liquidity works in the Bittensor network. In my next video, I'm going to show you how you can set positions using Taostats. Subscribe to this channel so you can see the latest changes in the Bittensor network and how you can observe them inside Taostats.